It shifts that whole spectrum. How do you define failure when you have a mobile, always-on connected environment? It's got some interesting pluses and minuses. So let's take a look at this, how it's a disruptive evolution. How many folks here have real good firewalls on their university, and it's a big fight to punch holes in to get applications running? Come on. How many people have firewalls? Let's be honest. Come on. I got news for you. I jokingly say firewalls are dead and long live firewalls, and I'll explain what that really means. These are used to what we traditionally define the enterprise. We put a nice hard wall around the moat, and we check people coming in to see that they belong to our club, and they only use the IT equipment that we want on our network. That's changed. We now have, in our case, 7,000 Trojan horses walking in every day. We have no, basically, perimeter to enforce with a firewall. The idea that having an intranet and an extranet, an internet, and an intranet are no longer, because that perimeter is gone. And in universities, we've actually been living this since the first wireless-enabled laptop got hooked up about 10 years ago. So this whole concept of defense in depth is no longer there. And it used to be this way, the model there on your right. With the data in the center and everything layered up. It's totally changed it because of the fact, I like to call them 7,000 Trojan horses at U of S that walk through our campus grounds every day, because this could be compromised. The other question I like asking, do you know where your device has been yesterday? How many people connected at a Starbucks or a McDonald's? Did you go to a drive-by infection point for a website you went to? Do you even have an antivirus on your mobile device? How many people have antivirus on their mobile devices? This is scary. So think about it. I'm going to attack. I'm going to put something on this. Stay away from the hard thing of the university servers and stuff like that. I'm going to go for this. And now, guess what? I no longer own this or control this as the university. This is brought to me by my students, my faculty, and my staff. Now you're starting to see the change in the risk paradigm that's taking place. So this is getting into why we're now starting to talk about something very, very critical called context of use. It used to be that if you were connected to the corporate network, you were trusted. Now I have to ask, how are you connecting? Are you coming off a university-provided desktop? Or are you coming in off of your smart TV in your living room? Why are you connecting? What's the purpose of a task? Are you going to improve someone's leave, authorize a purchase, send an email, contractually commit the building of a new building at the university worth $10 million? Now, what's the purpose? Or in the U of S case, you're into some workforce adjustment and budget adjustment, and you maybe are discussing who will be affected and laid off. We're talking about immensely vast, different information, different sensitivity. Where are you? Like I said, Starbucks, McDonald's, your office. What are you doing? Are you reading data, or are you actually creating it and authoring it and initiating it? And when are you doing this? So in other words, I could be in Australia. Why is Lawrence connecting to the network from both Australia and England and Ottawa at the same time or within an hour of each other? Is that really Lawrence? Has the machine been compromised? So these two issues are really marking this evolution to the mobile, social media, always-on society. Because that context of use, they're going to probably want to do it in the Facebook app. They want to look up who they're going to send an instant message to. They want to use what they use for their other forms of communication. They're going to tweet about it. It's not just email. No, it's tweeting. It's Facebook. And it's just expanding. So into that case, we bring the BYOD risk environment. There is a massive overhaul lack of security awareness by the user. When you talk to the 1995 birth year, or my daughter who's in 1993, their understanding of the risk of what they're putting on their mobile devices, and if they're going to go lose it, and how they could potentially impact their later life. I took advantage of the teaching lesson from Rob Ford, what happens if that picture had been of Rob Ford at 18 and it was him and it's now 30 years later and someone's complaining he was doing this illicit activity? The big thing about BYOD, if you try to ban it, you'll just force it underground. We have enough problems with fraudulent access points. How many people do war walking on campuses? Go out and go looking for illicit access points. Well, if you try to ban it, you're going to just kind of force that type of mentality alive and well. So you're better off trying to manage it, because if you try to ban it, you just hide the threat. You need to somehow put into place a controlled, secure environment to access what's really important, which is the university's data, the data that's entrusted to it, and the services that deliver it. And this is why I make the joke that firewalls are dead and long live firewalls. Firewalls are still required to provide that initial threshold of entering the university. But we also have to put security around the information that we have, and that security includes context of use. And we also have to look at the service. Does the person have the right to have access to that service from where they are? If you're on a beach in the Caribbean and you want to look at the financial report that's, if you're provincially funded, that's got to go up the chain, should you be allowed to do that while you're on vacation? It's that type of question has to be asked. The other interesting thing, unlike me, people don't want to carry two devices. I'm a bit paranoid. I can see the PRISM thing coming. I separate my personal life from my work life. So although it's getting harder, because of my research, I am now getting into that, I'll call it the researcher faculty thing, where my university ID has got an awful lot to do with my research work I'm doing. And I never really understood it, that it's very, very difficult for a researcher to do this separation. It's also a sign of the evolution. I don't want to carry two devices, but I will for the foreseeable future. And the other big thing is, to a lot of folks, a lot of people that are in my type of job, BYOD represents to them a massive lack of control. You're never going to regain control, so you better start trying to manage it and educate the user. And this is why we get into the society mode of always on mobile social media wear. And this is why I like to expand the definition of BYOD to any device, any ownership used anywhere, i.e. the world's biggest Trojan horse. Now, de-perimeterization, and there's a biblical reference here because a lot of the work has been done by the Open Group, Jericho Forum. For those not familiar with that section of the Bible, in the Battle of Jericho, Joshua blew his horns and knocked all the walls down. And their analogy with the use of personal mobile devices in the enterprise is those lovely walls that we used to build around our critical assets are now gone. And they've done an awful lot of good work. The problem is they were ahead of the curve. They were about back in 2005, 2006, and the problems are only hitting today. But it's very interesting to read and provides a very, 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 very good baseline of the problem set. And this goes back to the old idea that organizations were traditionally very heavily relied upon boundaries. I remember when I started working for the government, you had to come in to go through one security guard and another security guard. You always had a photo badge. You see it in some of our institutions in the US that have had security risks, where even the students and staff are wearing ID and you're supposed to challenge them. So it's starting to creep into higher ed. And the idea of this tight security perimeter. And this is sometimes it's called the onion model, most important in the center layered, and that's shifting away. So now this is where the context of use really comes in. It's not just who is accessing the data, but who, where, how, and with what. And this is the environment that the BYOD brings to us. So the question is, given your standard institution of higher education, how do we handle this transition? So I'm going to put up here two lists. I'm not going to walk you through them all. Hopefully I understand, I'm assuming the presentations are going to be taped and allow you to look at them. But before BYOD, it starts with, we had a hard perimeter, we had clear places we could enforce policy, we could apply that defense in depth, Only organizational provide hardware and software. We knew who was coming, how they were coming, and where they were. Who owns the device and who owns the data was clear. We kind of understood the threats, and getting compliance, formal verification of that was doable. BYOD comes along, and you get the world after BYOD. We now have a soft perimeter, if any perimeter. Policy enforcement points are now vague or non-existent. I don't have a spot on the line. I can say, I'll put a firewall here and I'll only let people that I know the devices are coming on, coming in, and how they're coming in. The hardware and software can be organizational, personal, or third party. There's a company that's talking about leasing laptops. So when you show into the airport on a business trip, rather than having to travel with one and all the security issues, you go to like budget rental laptop and you grab a laptop. I don't know if they're going to have a valid business model, but it's an interesting issue to rather having your laptop seized by customs and losing control of your information. It's no longer clear who is accessing, how they're accessing, and why and where. Who owns the device? The threats we don't understand because we don't understand where that device was the night before or last week. And what does compliance mean when it's no longer an organizationally owned device? So from a context of use case, this is where the very interesting issue of BYOD, because this is a significant business driver by itself. If you can say that they're always on, always connected, always availability. Wow, that means I'm going to get more than 40 hours a week. I'm going to get them bought in to drink the Kool-Aid. In higher ed, we've got a lot of faculty and staff that do that because of their passions. And higher ed, you want to be agile, accessible, and to support collaboration. And that's becoming, no matter where staff and faculty are located. You just got to look at the collaborative research that's being done by various different people. I'm working on a paper with a faculty member from James Madison University in Virginia and Stanford in California. We've never actually physically met. We're now talking on Skype, so I know what they look like. I've never met my doctoral dissertation supervisor because I'm doing it virtually. I've not met one member of my examining committee. See, this is starting to take place. You're putting the people with the right minds and the right eyes together, and mobility is just taking that to a real focus. So what we're really focusing on giving is our staff ubiquitous access to university data networks and services and applications, because of that goal to be agile, responsive, and deliver with value anywhere at any time. And unfortunately, we have to secure that. So what I'm trying to do in today's presentation is kind of paint this change and the fact we have to figure out how we can secure it, minimize the risk, and enable it. The big issue, and I'm going back to really reinforce this, it's traditionally only issue is who accessing the data used to be the question we asked. We now have to ask, how is the data being accessed, where they are there any expectation for the data's integrity and availability, and who owns and controls the device? I've actually attended a phenomenal legal presentation on BYOD. And I don't know if I even want to take my data outside the country anymore after that presentation. Given the ramifications of the U.S. intelligence service with its PRISM project, and probably who the primary funders of all the cloud R&D that have been done is probably the U.S. intelligence establishment, I don't know if I want it in the cloud either. And then all of a sudden, do I really want to take my research data to the U.S. or to another country where I may not own it or have access or control over it? It starts creating a very interesting issue. And is the security policy and compliance that I have to meet adaptable to meet to that environment? So that's why I put out to you, we're actually going through a very critical inflection point, that we're going to shift this need for security from almost a pseudo-enforcement model to where people are aware about it. Awareness is a very interesting thing about security, and I'm going to pick on my lovely wife for a bit because she's also in the security business, and we've had a conversation about this. She travels a lot on her own as a female. And when I'll go to a place and I'll go find a pub to have lunch and not think twice about it, where she'll look at the neighborhood, look at the potential risks to where she is, and may decide to stay in and order room service. To me, that's the best example I can get of situational awareness, that she knows that she could take a risk just going out for dinner, where I would just blindly plow ahead and not think twice about it. We have to get that type of a situational awareness into the individual user to be aware. Securing a void is not about the technology control. If you came here expecting me here to talk about mobile device management, no. Where it sits is the business impact of void has to be understood. De-perimeterization has to be thought about it, but the users have to understand the power they're getting when they're walking around with what once used to be a supercomputer in their hip pocket or purse. They have to understand, they could be on the bus sitting next to, if they're in industry, to an industrial spy that's reading over their shoulder and getting the latest financials on their company. So they have to gain that understanding and that ability to do that. Taking that and moving that into the higher education model is very difficult, because trying to articulate to our faculty and our students the impact that they're using void, the mobile access. Now, what should security be like at a university? And legal issues. They can barely deal with internet and electronic sales and email, and now we're talking about a highly mobile user that has got a device he owns that could have potential intellectual property on it, that this device is stolen, that it could have to be turned in as part of the discovery process of a lawsuit. Very, very complicated. I do not have the answer on how we elevate the awareness of users. It's just that we're going to have to do it. Otherwise, our job as security people and IT people is going to become very, very difficult. I'm just going to build this out. So, in terms of what security controls before and after void. Before void, we basically were in, hard perimeter. I call it the medieval castle model. You put guards at the gate, confidentiality focused, you got a hard perimeter, you can force it. You understood, if there were honorable days, where they used to line up and like on the Battle of Waterloo, where Napoleon and Wellington decided that a certain day to show up and face off with each other until the Prussians showed up and tilted the balance. You kind of understood who the enemy was. He actually wore different color uniforms. Made it kind of easy. That's where we're coming from. In a security way, we used to call that system high. We built the system to defend against the most sensitive data. Move to void, it's totally changed. You got to worry about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Personal identifiable information is now in the mix. Third-party information is not to be in the mix. Where you enforce policy to make sure the user is doing things may not be clear. I have no idea how much trust I should put in an Android device. I've talked to a couple of security people at the conference. They don't even want to allow an Android device on their network. They're not going to win that battle, but that's how they feel about it. And assurance, and that's a security professional way, is how much trust do I really put into this device to safeguard and protect my data? This is what we have to do. And this is why it's going to become extraordinarily challenging, because we've lost the perimeter. And there is no easy solution. Most people I've talked about it, they have no idea how they're going to control it, if they're ever going to control it. There's people in the industry that the CEO walks into the CISO, the Chief Informatics Security Officer, says, "We need void." The CISO objects to it, says, "We can't do that, it's a security risk." No, we need void. And it's happening. We're going to see that in our environments more and more. And then the plus is, with the openness and freedom of our environment and the desire for both our staff and the faculty to make use of the latest and greatest tools, we're going to have an environment that's going to be extremely difficult to secure. But don't get all, how we're doing. Perfect. There are some best practices. Get the pencil sharpened. You have to get into risk management. You have to get an understanding of what data you have, how sensitive it is, and what's your tolerance for risk. What could you have get compromised? How much risk are you willing to live with? Those are hard questions to get asked at in a university context. You have to know who should be at the table. I hint that I'm very lucky. I've got research ethics, campus safety, risk management, finance, procurement, School of Medicine, School of Nursing, School of Education, all sitting around the same table defining what the U of S policy should be. Finance is there because we have had $30,000 phone bills on mobile devices that are owned by the university because someone forgot to turn off roaming. We've negotiated them down, but we have to get a control on that cost. You know, I've got the privacy officer there because she's scared stiff of having to write up the report on a privacy compromise that occurs. It's really interesting when you can get that brain trust together to tackle the problem. I keep on, they can't rely on the perimeter. The who, what, when, where, and how has to be authorized. And you have to make sure you address all the data. In terms of security policies, one of the things that we've done at the University of Saskatchewan, and I really think it's a great idea, and I meant to put the link up to our research ethics page. If you go to www.usas.ca, they actually have a very lightweight, research ethics. They have a very lightweight policy, and they have all these different procedures. And that's the model, you know, specific principles, policy, procedures, and then processes. Policy, the idea is you set it, you don't touch it for 3 to 5 years. Procedure, you evolve it based on technology and directional change. And process are designed to be done rapidly. And also the approval level of these are based on, you know, our university policy committee is quite senior. They now know that a policy without procedure is useless. They want to see the drafts before they'll approve the policy. And we've identified a first cut of these. You know, how many of you folks have thought about putting a consent to wipe for your mobile devices? How many people are using ActiveSync? ActiveSync allows the user to self-wipe the device. You actually have to enshrine that in policy. It's similar with bricking the device, you know, where you turn it in so it can't be used anymore. In certain cases, you need a policy to do that. And that's who replaces the brick device. You know, you start opening this Pandora's box. My lawyer friends say e-discovery with the first time we have one of these admitted in a trial situation, it's going to be back up the same way. Oh, acceptable use policies. How many we have here? You guys got a section on mobile devices? Oh, excellent. I used to ask that question and no one would have anything. But see, that shows that the evolution is happening. Do they sign off once a year on their acceptable use policy?
They will be starting in January.
There we go. And that's the type of governance model you have to move into to allow this type of technology into the enterprise. The other thing I want to take a few minutes on, good, then we get into questions. The information model that we have at the University of Saskatchewan is going to have to evolve. This is the initial thoughts of that task force I talked about. Right now, our information policy is coming from one dimension, just university information. We now realize there are two other large categories. Personal identifiable information, and that can range from student records and staff records to the social scientists in the room. There are research sites where they're going to interview people and they're doing a longitudinal survey. Losing access to that research site could extend the end of their particular research program. They have to safeguard that. Third-party information, this can be licensed. U of S, I've got a great one right now with the geophysicists. The oil companies don't want them telling their competitors where they're discovering all the oil. And they're demanding very high walls and protection because of the economic advantages. So I've actually got a geologist walking around with an iPad with an LTE connection and plugged into a sat phone maybe in some place, and you can just see the potential risk you're getting into. So one of the things that's on the agenda is to actually open up the policy in the university. It's actually very flat, and move it into this 3 dimensions. And there's a couple people here with government background. I actually had a researcher suggested that he wanted protected B information. And those people with Government of Canada background know that's for designated information that is affixed. And then I talked with him, and he pulled out a security requirements checklist by his funding agency, telling him that he had protected B information, and my jaw hit the floor. So it's there if you go looking for it. The awareness may not be there about what they're doing with it and what they're handling it, but it is there. And finally, I wanted to talk about you can't boil the ocean at once. So what we decided at U of S, we're going after the devices that are supplied and paid for by the university. That's being driven by the business case of the high phone bills. Now the CRTC tabled some potential limits. We don't know if that's going to apply to large enterprise or not. I have not been able to get that clearly answered. But that's the group we're going after. And that's primarily administration, faculty, and staff who through the nature of their position are supplied a paid for device. The next group will be the real challenge. These are folks that routinely access university, personal, and third-party info, usually from a BYOD device, but it can include graduate students. And this is going to be our research ethics challenge. We have lots of graduate students that are accessing personal identifiable information through their anthropological, sociology, or psychology, or medical, or nursing research. They'll have to acknowledge and accept the mobile device policy and controls because they're accessing. But that's the only group we're going to go after. We're not going to go after the larger group. Then the last group is that occasional access to that type of data. And we haven't decided the technology controls we'll put into place. We're talking about virtual machines. I know a Citrix server on their tablet that they sign into. We haven't even discussed this. These first 2 are well understood and where we perceive to be the greatest risk to the university as we speak. So hopefully this fall we will have the policy and procedures that cover off these 2 categories. That's this one and this one. And the one that's going to present the biggest challenge are the researchers, i.e. postdocs and graduate students. Now, some takeaways. Mobile security is not just a technology issue. It should not just be the information security officer and your IT person. You got to have the business owners there. I am so fortunate that I have that task force, and I've got the director of procurement, the director of payments, the director of campus safety, taking the time to do the work. And because of that, we know we're going to have a good chance of success. Now, we haven't started debating the T's and C's of every little policy and procedure, but at least we got the right people around the table. And that's because it reflects a business and technology issue. There are multiple stakeholders. I have no idea what the curveball, the Tri-Council, or Chi-High are going to throw me from their perspective. The carriers care about this big time because they're worried about their liability exposure. Interesting group to sit down is to talk to a carrier on what they think about BYOD. And you don't want to do it in an office, you want to do it over a pint and get their honest worry. Because I'll tell you why. You're buying your phone on a 3-year plan. You get sued. You don't own it. You're technically leasing it. They could get pulled into the court case. And in terms of management, you can't ban the device. You got to manage the risk. Best practices are evolving. This is a phenomenal area. Unfortunately, most of the literature on it and recommendations are about preserving the defense in depth, the castle mentality. Very few individuals are looking at the data and the context of use. And that's where my research is showing that the emphasis should be placed on. You have to make that shift. It'll explore every problem you have in your identity and authorization plan. If your awareness program doesn't work well. And one thing I didn't mention here, we talked a bit about policy, but getting users' consent is going to become extraordinarily important. So that day when you have to wipe the device, you can go wipe it. Yeah, and they lose the video of their kid making their first steps. Well, sorry, it's a consequence of you losing the device. You also have to make sure that you understand what the university's tolerance is for acceptable risk. And you got to think assurance and trust in the devices. And unfortunately, none of the current manufacturers are even in this space. They're not thinking about, making sure the device has high level of safeguarding. Not to pick on Apple or Google, they both have two different approaches to this in the mobile devices, but they have to mature a lot. So that's why it comes down to the last one. You got to start engaging the user. It's bad enough trying to make a user security aware, but trying to make them sit down and realize how much risk they're walking around in their hip pocket is going to be a big challenge. And unfortunately, this is not a problem that you can just wait and see how it evolves. You're going to live it in September. Wait till you have your first set of Google goggles show up and want to connect to your wireless network. That's September, if not sooner. Or the note-taking pen that's now 802.11 enabled. Or the flipped mouse, which is not a mouse, but it's a stylus. Not exactly sure how it works, but the fine arts people, like my daughter, use it. It's happening. And it's a case of trying to identify where the most critical resources are and getting at least some type of fences and moats around them. And I think that's it. Yeah, oh, sorry. Yes. Questions? Come on.
Two questions on the
Oh. Actually, you know what? The first one is, what about using BES, BlackBerry Enterprise Server, and its new incantation, I forget what it's called. As a Canadian, I wish BlackBerry hadn't waited for the 10. Or whatever it is Z10, Q10. They had the technology to do this, but their delay to the market meant they lost. I don't know if they can ever come back. So the answer is yes. It would, from an enterprise point of view, where you can enforce the device the users have to use, it works. It doesn't work when people can bring whatever device they want it.
I guess the only thing I'm concerned about is the concept of de-perimeterization. And I think it's important. For me, my ERP will never be on the same flat network as all of them.
Yes.
So just making sure that's put into that context. I think you're absolutely right. There's going to be a de-perimeterization.
I think that's a very good way to describe it.
But I don't think you're going to see the perimeters within the network, at least for certain.
I like drawing analogies. It's kind of like the breakup of the former Soviet Union. It used to have one big perimeter around it. Now we've broken up all the Soviet stuff. Each one is its own country with its own border. I'm trying to come up with a good analogy, but you're right. De-perimeterization actually is a very, very good way to describe it.
I was just thinking about this, because I've done a lot of the same thing, but at the same time, we're giving our employees VPN clients that they can write past the firewall. So really, they have layer 2 adjacency to those critical resources. And once you've got a compromised device with malware on it, I'm worried.
Yes. And this is actually the reason why it's so important to have this discussion. You both are right. You both have a viewpoint. Once we allowed these, in our case, these 7,000 Trojan horses in every year, I'm not even sure why we have a VPN client anymore, but I know why we have it and why it's important. But we have to rethink the whole model, and we have to get things up at the data and data application and authentication authorization level. There will always be some firewall, hence my concept, firewall's dead, long live the firewall. But what it's doing will change. Like, I don't understand this, sorry, but.
Well, no, I think you're right, but I think a lot of people don't understand the impact that de-perimeterization or de-perimeterization has. That means that we have to encrypt and secure all of the devices on our network. We've essentially gotten lucky by having a firewall. We have
Yes.
devices that can be managed from that security perspective. Now I'm going to have to tell the back end of they can't have administrative access to their device when they encryption process.
Anyway, running out of time, Mike, before we go, I want to answer that last question. It's really important. On the web, it says, Lawrence, in some sense, university has been doing BYOD for years. Yes, probably 10 years. We haven't been doing information governance. Exactly. So isn't the whole discussion really about maturing or thinking about information governance rather than solving a technical problem? He's got it. BYOD is going to, it's that Pandora's box that's going to prove that the emperor's got no clothes. So it's a very insightful question that really, you have to, it's going to bring all the assumptions being wrong out in the forefront, and we have to go after knowing what data we have, how important is it, and who controls access to it, and how we control access.
Okay, we've got to end now. We're over time, so thanks a lot.